Well, good morning and happy Sabbath. And we are going to start with a word of prayer. So let's begin. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you for this Sabbath day. As time continues, we are so grateful for the rest and the peace and safety of each Sabbath. Thank you for instituting that wonderful institution from the very beginning. It has been a tremendous blessing to all of humanity over time. And gracious God, we just ask that you'll be with us now, that you'll quicken our minds, be with me as I speak, and give us the unction of your presence, your spirit with us now. We pray for all of those gathering on your Sabbath throughout this world. And we are in a time where there are a lot of things happening. We pray for those affected by weather events, for those affected by tragedy, for those affected by oppression and abuse. And we just ask that you'll keep our minds focused on the issues of this dispensation, and that we will allow you to do the work in our hearts individually, so that we stay on the path and that we will be able to be used by you in the closing moments of this earth's history. Thank you for our world leaders. And we just ask that you'll be with every world leader, continental leader, and all of the members scattered through this globe. We want to become like Jesus, and we want to be faithful stewards of the truth that you have entrusted with us. So be with us now. In Jesus' name, amen. I'll maybe stand for a moment, and I can resume my seat. It's it's busy times for all of us. And as you can see on the whiteboard, topic today, culture, feminism, and the patriarchs. And as I was going over material and putting things together, I've realized it's not going to all be done in one session. And I'm reviewing things, some of Elder Tess's studies, so they're out in the public domain, but also wanting to, in a sense, as I've contemplated more for myself, um, just where am I, and where is my heart, my mindset, as we've, all of us I know, been privy to some of the dialoguing that's happened a little more in recent time, and some of the different events that are happening. We need to truly continue always examining ourselves to see rather if we be in the faith. And so this is more a study where, just going through for myself some of the build up and the reasons of why we're where we are, and if there are others that aren't. Anyway, with that little bit of introduction, I'll just sit down and uh, end up uh, culture. We've had quite a few studies on, and feminism itself, and I will be unpacking, aspects and highlighting certain things, and then the patriarchs. actually is a book by Angela. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Steiny, but the Patriarchs, the Origin of Inequality. And I won't be getting to that today, but I am going to begin with reading a little, just as a teaser, reading a little bit of information on it. It was published in this year, 23, actually just fairly recently came out. And what it says in terms of a bio is Angela Saini is an award-winning British journalist and broadcaster based in New York. Her previous book, Superior, The Return of Race Science, was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize and named the Book of the Year by Nature, the Financial Times, and NPR's Science Friday. Her book, Inferior, How Science Got Women Wrong, has been translated into 14 languages. So British journalist, broadcaster, and scientist. And the book itself on the sleeve says, what if we didn't assume that men have always ruled over women? If we saw gendered oppression as something fragile that alongside other forms of inequality has to be constantly remade and reasserted. In societies where women left their own families to live with their husbands, marriage customs came to be informed by the widespread practice of captive taking and slavery, later influencing laws that alienated women from systems of support and denied them equal rights. And then lastly, in our own time, despite the pushback against sexism, abuse, and discrimination, even revolutionary efforts to bring about equality have often ended in failure and backlash. Failure and backlash, we certainly agree. And from there, we'll go into screen share. So, question. There we go. Question. What is that? Or I could say, what is this? Any guesses?
Other than a little bug on a blossom, I can't tell what kind of bug it is.
Okay. Anyone else?
Maybe it's not even a blossom, it's some sort of leaf.
There's the bigger hint. If you read the caption. Anybody's guess?
A
The
firefly.
reason I'm pausing.
Firefly.
Thank you, Katya, because I wanted to see what term people came up with. Yes, it is a firefly. And are there any little bits of information that over the years anyone has gleaned about fireflies that they want to share at this point? Firefly. Often it's a good thing to ask the questions. You know, we often go through the what, where, when, where, pardon me, what, where, when, how, and what, or why and how. 5 W's, or called 5 W's. Who, for, and then how. But anyone have any tidbits of information on fireflies? Okay, well, we will consider why do fireflies light up? Because that is a fact. I mean, fireflies, the photo on the screen shows their abdomen lights up. Why? What's the reason? Reasons the firefly lights up are attracting mate, attracting prey, and to stave off predators. Their protection is also assisted by their bitter taste. Well, I've never tasted a firefly, fortunately, never flown into them. But they evidently have a bitter taste, which many predators obviously avoid. However, not necessarily some species of frogs, because some frogs will eat so many fireflies in a night that the frog itself will actually start to glow, which I found quite interesting. So what are fireflies? As Henry already said, they're little insect, and hopefully the photo does display clearly enough on Zoom there, but they're part of the flying beetle order of insects, Coleoptera. And fireflies glow. It's the firefly's abdomen, as seen here, and the bioluminescence occurs in a blinking on and off pattern, or can in a blinking off pattern, pulsing. Fireflies in an area can actually end up with synchronization of that pulsing pattern, which is very interesting. And another little interesting factoid, also some females are able rather to copy the pattern of other species. And as a consequence, some males will become attracted in, land beside the female, only to be absolutely instantly consumed. That's interesting. And another name for a firefly, and that's why I was pausing to see if anybody would actually answer, is lightning bug. And where there are estimated to be over 2,000 species of fireflies spread across temperate and tropical zones all over the world. And I know in my own experience, the only time actually that I've seen fireflies is, until then, I never had seen one. I knew about them, but was down in Washington State, actually attending a camp meeting back in the day, and going out for an evening walk, group of us, and there were fireflies all around. It was just dusk and then into dark, and so I found it absolutely stunning to be able to see these fireflies all around. It was really quite a phenomenon. When most species of fireflies are nocturnal, but there are some species who are daytime insects. They use pheromones to attract mates. So the daylight fireflies obviously lighting up, whether they do it or not, possibly not. They use pheromones, which is that very subtle, whatever you maybe can call it, a scent, but that a lot of animals, including human beings, do have, that provide a level of science that has done a lot of research in more recent time since their discovery, and has a lot to do with attraction, but at any rate, and how is it that the firefly's abdomen lights up? The light of a firefly is a chemical reaction caused by an organic compound, interesting name, luciferin, in their abdomen. As air rushes into a firefly's abdomen, it reacts with the luciferin. Consequently, it causes a chemical reaction that gives off the firefly's familiar glow. This light is sometimes called cold light because it generates so little heat. In addition, fireflies can regulate the airflow into their abdomens to create this pulsating pattern. And last little bit of tidbit on fireflies. This is a photo that a gentleman took. And just quickly read about it. Dan Bush in Albany, Missouri, captured fireflies and star trails by means of a single night photo composite on June 18th, 2022. He wrote, "This is a view from my Aurora camera, which is designed to record auroras and meteors in my northern sky. There were no auroras or meteors this evening, but there wasn't a lack of things to see. The circular arcs in the sky are circumpolar star trails." Obviously, over time that. The horizontal white streaks in the middle of the image are the headlights from cars passing by, and the curved green-yellow streaks, mostly seen against the moonlit landscape, are from lightning bugs or fireflies, depending on which part of the world you live. So everyone has a preference for the name that they use for fireflies, and it sometimes is a cultural. Anyway, I'm going to use a firefly as a parable. You probably already had guessed that. And before I stop screen share, I'm going to move to the next slide. So this was just in the last week posted on Facebook, actually by a member in our movement, and it caught my eye, and so I'm going to read it. Firefly. I watch my friend become a shell of herself. Her husband, once charmed by her effervescent zest for life, now finds it inconvenient, unaligned with how he imagined a wife. I remind her fireflies do not thrive in captivity, deprived of air, companions, nutrients. They are not meant to glow in isolation. I observe as she plots her escape, maps her way back to the wild. One of thousands migrating home, free to dance among her sisters, out of reach from hunters who have yet to learn you cannot bottle light. And I'm going to stop screen share just for a moment and just ask, what is the parable there? What is the parable? And often with, as Elder Perminder has done with us at various times, you need to unpack who are the characters mentioned in Matthew 13 or in whatever parable it is that we're discussing. But what is the parable? Another word we could use would be metaphor. What is the metaphor? In this little, I'll call it a poem. Any idea? The metaphor of a firefly is used representing whom? How would we describe who is being represented? Annabelle, any ideas? It's a fairly simple, brief little parable, but
Sorry, Debbie, I didn't get to hear most of it because I was just coming into the building.
there you go, Annabelle. Forgive me. That's it. So hello, David. Hello, hello, David. So I'll pick on Henry because I'm not sure if he was hearing it all. Forgive me to
Yeah, I'm
move on.
still trying to contemplate what I could really get out of that. Sometimes I don't get things the first time round. I probably might have to hear it again.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to screen share again then just quickly and let's just. So the woman writing the coffin is basically comparing a friend of hers who has a husband, but the key phrase there, two phrases. Now the husband now finds it inconvenient. He did at one point, was charmed by this woman's effervescent personality, whatever traits, but now finds it inconvenient, unaligned with how he imagined a wife. So there's a disconnect. He's got preconceived ideas about who a wife is, what a wife is. And he's no longer interested in the kind of wife that she is. He's once charmed with her, but no longer. And so this friend who's written this little poem is relaying on to her friend, the wife, that fireflies can't thrive in captivity, in oppression, being contained, not being free to be their authentic self. In this case, a firefly, but the firefly is the metaphor for a woman in a relationship that is in some way abusive. And the fireflies deprived of air, as we just learned, it's the chemical reaction of air being drawn in through their abdomen that creates the ability for them to glow, chemical reaction. And so deprived of air, stifled, the firefly would cease to be able to attract a mate, cease to attract prey, ward off predators, all the various things. And deprived of companion, fireflies do definitely fly in groups and you'll see, you won't ever find just one firefly. You'll see a whole lot of them out, in the coming darkness and in the dark. And likewise with a woman, to be isolated and kept without a support network, without friends, female friends, and obviously a firefly deprived of nutrients, where we don't eat, we die. And the nutrients are more than just the physical food. And likewise it is with human beings. We thrive, we're nourished by a lot more than just what it is we put into our mouths in terms of sustenance. So, and then it goes on. Not meant to glow in isolation. Every unique human being has talents, has things to share, things to give to the world, things to serve others with. And in isolation, human beings, which is one of the reasons why with criminals put into solitary confinement in prison, it's meant as a more severe punishment, so to speak, because isolating somebody, I mean, we've just gone through in Canada here this whole kerfuffle over Paul Bernardo being moved to medium security prison from obviously isolation and in maximum security in a prison, and the fumbling of that whole matter. Corrections Canada notifying 3 months ahead it came out, but at the same time it worked out that nobody got the memo at the minister's office did get the memo, staff, but it didn't go as far as to the minister, Marco Mendoncino, and even the PMO's Prime Minister's office ended up learning before the minister involved, Minister of Safety, ended up finding out. And so the poem just concludes with the writer observing, and then she speaks about how her friend is escaping. She's plotting her escape and coming back to freedom. And just to elaborate, expanding it to the broader womanhood, if you like, whereby free to dance among her sisters, female who's going to be valued where she wasn't valued by her husband for who she was, and all the parts that were her authentically, and instead she's going to have freedom and be beyond the reach. And then again, the metaphor there in terms of the fireflies, out of reach from hunters who have yet to learn you cannot bottle lightning. Fireflies also being called lightning bugs. So it's not possible to cage, to make captive, to isolate, to oppress, to deprive of oxygen, you know, the very breath that we need for life, and to cut off from companionship with others, and the very nutrients that all of us as human beings need to survive.
Yeah, 1 second, James.
Okay, so that was actually just meant as a little part of a bit of an introduction. I'm going to go to the next part of the introduction. Yeah, I want us to just unpack one spirit of prophecy passage, and it will come in a little bit later as we move on. But this is from Christ's Object Lesson, and I'll maybe offer to read. Volunteers sometimes are not there, but and I ended up quoting Mark 4 as well, because Matthew 13 is used. Sometimes Mark is used, sometimes Luke is used, sometimes in this passage, dealing with the agriculture model with the parable of Matthew 13, but it's elsewhere as well. And so I'm going to read it, and then the spirit of prophecy. And these are they which are sown among thorns, such as hear the word, and the cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lust of other things entering in, choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful. He also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. Matthew 13:22. The gospel seed often falls among thorns and noxious weeds. And if there is not a moral transformation in the human heart, if old habits and practices in the former life of sin are not left behind, if the attributes of Satan are not expelled from the soul, the wheat crop will be choked. The thorns will come to be the crop and will kill out the wheat. Grace can thrive only in the heart that is being constantly prepared for the precious seeds of truth. The thorns of sin will grow in any soil. They need no cultivation, but grace must be carefully cultivated. The briars and thorns are always ready to spring up, and the work of purification must advance continually if the heart is not kept under the control of God, if the Holy Spirit does not work unceasingly to refine and ennoble the character. The old habits will reveal themselves in the life. Men may profess to believe the gospel, but unless they are sanctified by the gospel, their profession is of no avail. If they do not gain the victory over sin, then sin is gaining the victory over them. The thorns that have been cut off, but not uprooted, grow apace until the soul is overspread with them. And again, this is a parable that has a rich plethora of meaning. And we've, over a lot of time, been looking at this parable and different aspects of it and unpacking it. I just want us briefly to just reconsider this passage and just the import that it would have for us in the movement. So just reworking it a little wee bit. The truth. What's in the square brackets are the words used by Ellen White. I've exchanged those for different words. The truth, we say the midnight cry message, often is heard by those still caught up in the culture of patriarchy, while struggling to stay on the path and not fall into the wicked world below. And the deceitfulness of riches. And if there is not a change, if old habits and practices in the former life of sin are not left behind, if the attributes of Satan are not expelled from the soul, the mature character, the individual themselves, the heart, will be choked. The unrenounced sin, and in this case, it would be sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, will come to be the crop and will kill out the fruits of the spirit in the soul. The wheat will be choked out. And the wheat also can represent the whole person because it's the harvest that is the fruit being harvested. Grace can thrive only in the heart that is being constantly prepared for the precious seeds of truth. The thorns of sin will grow in any soil. They need no cultivation, but grace must be carefully cultivated. That's a call for us to day by day and continuously be examining ourselves. Because if sexism abides in the heart, if loyalty to patriarchy, to conservatism, remains, it will choke the good aspect of the message, the person's good traits. The sins are always ready to spring up, and the work of purification must advance continually. If the heart is not kept under the control of God, if the Holy Spirit does not work unceasingly to refine and ennoble the character, the old habits will reveal themselves in the life. Tamina and others have done wonderful studies on that whole connection. Men may profess to believe the gospel, but unless they are sanctified by the gospel, their profession is of no avail. I always remember Elder Tess remarking that believe what comes out of a person's mouth. When somebody tells you they're quote unquote racist, sexist, misogynistic, whatever, or they're planning to do this or this or this, believe them. I mean, she's not making the case that you're to believe everything somebody says, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or whoever, George Santos, whoever. But at the same time, people give you the indication of who they are and what's in their heart. Believe them. If they do not gain the victory over sin, then sin is gaining the victory over them. The sins that have been renounced for a time, cut off, but not set aside permanently, fully uprooted. I think of thistles, and Henry, with your garden, hopefully you don't have any. Some areas the thistles thrive more, Russian thistles, different kinds of thistles, and you have to get right the full root, otherwise you can cut off the top portion, even get a little portion of the root and the plant plucked up, but more thistles will grow back. And so it's an ongoing process sometimes, but set aside permanently, not set aside permanently, grow apace until the soul is overspread with them. And then I added two other of Ellen White's statements. It is impossible for the seed of the word to bring forth fruit. For the life of a person like this, for the life of the soul is given to nourish old, conservative, patriarchal mindset. Her words were the thorns of worldliness. And for us in the movement, we know worldliness isn't, quote unquote, diving back into the world. And then she's quoting Mark 4:19, and the lust of other things. These are not necessarily things sinful in themselves, but something that is made first instead of the kingdom of God. And that expanded understanding of the kingdom of God and who God is, who the king is, involves how God sees homosexuality, transgender individual, sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, how God himself or themselves see those things. Whatever attracts the mind from God, whatever draws the affections away from Christ, episcopal idolatry, is an enemy to the soul. Oops. Stop screen share and any comments or questions just at that point. We've just done a little bit of an introduction, dealing with a parable, firefly representing a woman, and with some agricultural model thoughts, dealing with truth that lands amongst thorns and briars, and how we can view that in terms of present time in this dispensation with respect to our movement, being in the movement. comments have been made by both Elder Parminder and Elder Tess along the vein of people remaining in the movement, but that have not accepted, and we'll be coming to that a little bit more, but have not accepted fully. And that's what we're going to move to right now. But any comments or any questions, anyone just at this point? Okie doke. In that case, then we'll just simply move on. And a thought question: how do we choose our own path? And I'd like to suggest that there are 4 steps. It's a process. So the process ends up becoming taking a teaching, a message, and as we can see here, receiving it, liking it, you know, engaging with it. But at the same time, as time goes on, taking it and determining that there are some aspects of it that are not palatable to me. And therefore, I cut those aspects off. And then further to that, even I end up twisting what remains. I adjust the interpretation. I twist it a little bit to be more palatable. And then the very last thing that I end up doing, and some of this can happen, I would suggest, even unconsciously, whereby the person involved is not necessarily even aware of what it is, perhaps, that they're doing until a further test comes. But the final step in the process is to add my own, just add on a couple of things and, take my pen and just, so this is how I see it. This is how I see it. Fit it into place and end up being able to, in that process, mutilate the message, mutilate the truth. And yet, as I say, in some cases, being totally unaware. Some will be aware of what it is that they're doing, but some will not be aware of what it is that they're doing. And so, in a sense, it becomes this process of taking, that first step in choosing our own path, taking the message, understanding issues, understanding the 2018 Midnight Cry, understanding radical feminism, understanding everything that Elder Tess has said. Then cutting off the point that they don't like. And it generally is everything that relates to the test they face, understanding as we do, there are different dispensations and the test is different for different dispensations, but cutting off parts of a message that we don't like, it just grates on us. We aren't going to accept that. And then manipulating it, twisting it to put themselves in a more favorable light and thereby, in many cases, justify their own status, excusing their own sexism. Oh, I didn't really mean that. Oh, I was only joking. I'm not racist. Whatever it is. And then the last step, adding their own bits and pieces, and that helps with the justification side of things. We always gather together things that justify us a little bit more, and we rationalize it, and it ends up becoming something that we don't see. We stop seeing it. We have no remorse about what we've done. We don't believe we're the problem. We're not the problem. I'm fully justified in remaining the way I am, and it's fundamentally dangerous. And Sister or Elder Tess, I believe, isn't overstating it or dramatizing it too much. So, choosing our own path. And one of the things, well, a couple of things that Elder Tess brings out is in terms of, some of the history that we already know. Obviously, Elder Jeff, this was a process that he went through, and it did begin in 2018, but it reached the climax in August of 2019, as we know. But other examples that Elder Tess is using to show this a little bit more is in terms of the 2016 election. And the point that she's making, the 2016 election, we're all familiar. Well, who were the individuals involved? 2016. Who were the individuals involved in the presidential election? Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And the point that Elder Tess brings out on this, in this context, on this theme, is that long before Hillary Clinton was up against Donald Trump in November of 2016, he had to defeat somebody else in July. And who would that character be? Or have been? Would have been to do with the Democratic leadership race? Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. There were others on the platform running for the leadership of the Democratic Party to be coming up against Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren was one. Also on the left, and but Bernie Sanders, and there ended up even being a little bit of a I'll just say falling out. It got smoothed over later on in a sense, but falling out even between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders because of the position Bernie Sanders was taking, and the squad, AOC and the other women, but also how it contrasted with even the position that Elizabeth Warren was in her platform taking, and she wasn't willing to go as far left as what Bernie Sanders was. And Elder Tess is bringing out the point that Hillary Clinton had to defeat Bernie Sanders. And the question could be asked, why? I mean, obviously she won the leadership race, the Democratic Party, and was the one that was up against Donald Trump, rather, from the Republican side. But why did she have to defeat Bernie Sanders? A hint was already given. No thought? Because her platform and her position differed from Bernie Sanders. Further left. He was further left, and some of the principles that he was upholding were not ones that he was interested in. And so the point Elder Tess is making is that people in the movement were on the Bernie Sanders side and continued to be on the Bernie Sanders side. They had, you know, the right and the left, and they had ostensibly taken on the trappings of the movement and were going along in support of everything. But when the test ended up coming, they had chosen their own path. And in 2016, they would have been more in support of the social justice agenda of Bernie Sanders than where Hillary Clinton was standing on the spectrum. And so as a consequence, in 2018, in the movement, the test that came with the Midnight Cry had already been failed by many in the movement in July of 2016. And they were taking aspects of messages coming and then ending up interpreting it, cutting out parts, and twisting it a little, manipulating it, and then adding some other things, and not necessarily recognizing where it was taking them, which in essence was off the path. So 2018 was part of when we could have seen, and as it went into 2019, how we were seeking our own way in different contexts, and be warned. Anyway, and Elder Teth, which I'm not going to go into, it brings out how, you know, she's to help people understand sexism and how deeply rooted it is, and so on. She's had to in depth go through a lot of these messages, showing the shift from the right to the left, but having to go into more detail. What does the right really represent before really unpacking what does the left represent, and how where are the cautions in terms of the left side that we have to be aware of understanding. And we have to understand both. We have to understand the shift from right to left. We have to understand sexism and misogyny and how it impacts us individually, and how it affects the movement as well. And in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, we've certainly seen some of that play out, as I say, in some of the dialogue that's been happening. And so one of the other examples that Elder Tess goes on to is in terms of make sure. Oh, pardon me. I guess I do have that screenshot. Seeing it in my own background doesn't help. But anyway, The example as well that she brings in is a man by the name of Jimmy Savile, and his surname Savile. And just as a little interesting aside, it's interesting to me that his surname, his last name, has the word vile in it. I mean, it is pronounced Seville, but vile, and certainly we think of that word revile, and that's exactly what happened in his case. He's his name now has become infamous, and through Elder Tess we learned about him. I certainly had never heard of him prior to her unpacking some of the information on him. So does anyone remember anything in terms of Jimmy Savile that they want to share a little bit, just to explain who was he? He's dead. He died in 2011, I think it was. But a lot of information about his life didn't surface until after his death. He was, I guess I'm answering my own question a little bit, but others can certainly add in. But he was actually knighted at one point, received an award, the British Order, one of the British Order awards, but also knighted by the Queen. And evidently knighthood ends when a person dies, evidently, although I think some people still, even yet in the media, refer to him, or some of the stories on him still referred to him after his death as Sir. But any information anyone wants to share? What did he become infamous for?
Wasn't it that all the orphanages, and then he was a sex offender of in all his outreach projects?
Yes,
Me-
Annabelle, that's exactly it in a nutshell. Different hospitals, different, places he visited where he had full access, because he was also a very highly thought of personality on television, various programs and so on over in England, and had become very beloved. So he did have, in essence, free reign, open access to, and he was almost a little like a Pied Piper, different video footages and different scenes and different things where, he's got children trailing after him, or young people gathered around him, or sitting at tables, and where he's, in the background there and laughing and joking, because he was known as quite an affable individual, humorous, and all light and bright and innocent, right? But of the ones that came forward after his death, they estimate that over, I believe it was about 400, he ended up being charged with 400 cases. Maybe not fully that many charged with, but they estimate over 400, probably a lot more, because it spanned 40 years. And, just a horrific thing. But what Elder Tess is bringing out is his example is a, sort of like Donald Trump exemplifying certain things we want to highlight, almost becomes a bit of a symbol at times. But Jimmy Savile's example highlights this whole process that I just was describing of, in essence, it's not just choosing your own path, but it's creating your own God, a God in your own image. And Jimmy Savile ended up, he was Catholic, but his version of Catholicism, because he'd already taken this truth, in a sense, the message, it can be Christianity itself, it can be Catholicism, it can be Protestantism, it can be the Midnight Cry, but taking truth, taking a message and cutting out the parts that, nope, that I don't want that part. And then ending up twisting what's left to be favorable to your own situation, your sexism, your abuse, your whatever, and then adding on. And Elder Tess makes the point that Jimmy Savile didn't have to be a Catholic. He didn't have to be religious at all, because it was, in essence, outside religion. He was just taking things, the God he had created, and using it to justify. I think at one point he ended up saying, as Elder Tess commented, that God must have a sense of humor. I mean, talk about, yes, God does have humor as a part of his being, but talk about a blasphemous kind of statement, considering all that he had done that came to light after his death. Made statements like that, but his God is not Pope Francis's God. There's a difference, and he was letting people know, like he was letting people know, and yet it was allowed to continue and continue and continue. And the thought question could be asked: how can such occur? How can such abuse end up continuing, in essence, under the noses of? Because he had some very, very famous friends, and rubbing shoulders with different people. And as Annabelle, you were suggesting, he also gave a lot to charity. Had a lot of foundation, couple of foundations, and various outlets for giving away money. And but how can things like that happen? And I'll make that a rhetorical question, if you like, unless someone has something they wanted to add in. How does it happen?
Well, just a
And
quick thought. I mean,
go ahead, Henry. Yeah.
it's just like when we're learning about the counterfeit. The counterfeit is so close to the real. So likewise here, there's good mixed in with bad. And for that reason, you can see that it becomes much more deceptive.
And we must remember that a little bit of poison mixed in to a
And
cup makes the whole cup poison. So evil mixed in with the good's, in a sense, irrelevant, because the evil exists
That's
there,
so
and that
true.
makes it all evil.
And yet most of us don't go to the extreme that Jimmy Savile did, but relating this to the quote that you read, I think it boils down to not esteeming the messengers that God sends, and esteeming self quite highly, maybe on the same level. So why, we're all called to study for ourselves. And so, I've studied and I've come out with this type of thinking. And why, and everybody can find a quote to support their own thinking. And yeah, when we esteem our own thinking above the message that God's chosen messenger brings. Do you think?
Annabelle, you've hit a very important point, on a very important point. And it does strike a nerve, particularly because often within Adventism, there is that well, I'll use the word pride. I was trying to fish for a different word, but that pride that we are interpreting the scriptures correctly, that we are interpreting the spirit of prophecy correctly, and that it nails it down. Both those scriptures, spirit of prophecy, nails it down. And I'm fine, thank you very much. Esteeming the messengers or not, and I mean, Ellen White writes lots throughout the testimonies where she speaks in terms of pastors, ministers, whereby it's often around the family board, as she puts it, the dining room table kind of thing at mealtime, as a family will end up discussing the Sabbath sermon and whatever, and where often it's the adults, the parents in that family, and they're sowing the seeds in their children, because what's happening is the parents are criticizing and judging and bringing out comments and saying, oh well, so and so, and they look this way, or they didn't do this, or this, whatever their complaint is, and it's being heard by the children present, and it's insinuating doubts, these seeds of doubt, and many times it bears fruit, and young people walking away from God, walking away from fellowship with God's people. Elder Tess also brings out, to add to the remarks that have been made, Elder Tess also brings out that phrase, imperfect people. In many cases, situations, and towards the end, I'll read something that was just posted, well, actually published in the Guardian this week. But people view the victim, as an imperfect victim. I mean, in some cases, it might be a Jimmy Savile with an insecure child, or with a person dealing with a disability or handicap of some sort, or whatever it is. Or it might be a famous individual, and people end up viewing that person as an imperfect victim. It's interesting because one of the strategies Donald Trump has used is to constantly play the victim, and that he's the one that has been wronged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in some cases, perpetrators that end up getting found out before they die, unlike Jimmy Savile, may end up doing that very thing. And that's where the gaslighting comes in, and twisting it around to, no, you're the problem. I'm not the problem. I'm the victim here. But imperfect victim, it has a lot. And one of the things that the Me Too movement, and that's on the timeline that you can't see above, but anyway, we'll get to that probably in the next study. But the Me Too movement, that's one of the things, in a sense, that it opened up. And I'll say more of the hashtag Me Too movement of 2017 that sort of took off into 2018. The hashtag Me Too movement allowed imperfect victims to speak up. Ordinary people, so many women had a story, and it went viral. People telling their stories, and it was something that actually the woman who, Tarana Burke, who actually initially had been the originator of, and I'll put it, Me Too, space between, no hashtag, Me Too, ended up later started really drawing back, and in some cases actually wanting to distance herself from the hashtag Me Too movement, because she felt it was taking things in the wrong direction, et cetera, and she didn't really want her name associated with it. I mean, I think it still is as the originator of the concept, but at the same time, what happened in later time, because she founded it in 2006, but what happened in later time in 2017 into 18 was that it took a life of its own, and it became a real movement, and she didn't want a part of that, interestingly. But Elder Test brings out, in terms of serial killers targeting prostitutes, and Paul Bernardo, as I mentioned, right in the news again. And there are a lot of young people nowadays, they have no idea what's the story of Paul Bernardo. And her name just left me, Gamalko, her first name, whatever, and all of that horrific abuse that was just a shock. And it's not necessary to focus in on any one person, any one case. I mean, Elder Tess was using Jimmy Savile because of the horrific nature and the point she was wanting to make in terms of choosing our own path and creating our own God in our image. But at the same time, serial killers, nameless, anybody who's a serial killer, often targeting prostitutes, Indigenous women, the missing and murdered Indigenous women story is often ignored. And why? Imperfect victim. Believing the perpetrator, believing the abuser above the victim. And that gets played out over and over and over again in so many different cases. Society could do something could change things, but generally society doesn't. And just one last point that I wanted to bring out, actually 2 points. The SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, it's easy to look at, especially even in more recent time too, but some of the steps that are being taken step by step by step, dismantling progress, undoing gains that have taken, in some cases, decades and decades to achieve. And we can look at the Supreme Court and decry it and basically say, oh, Charles Thomas and and Samuel Alito and whoever, whatever. And in a sense, view the danger as the Supreme Court. But in reality, wherein lies the danger is in society, in the culture. And the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial was epitomizing that, how very quickly, and very similar to this Jimmy Savile case in certain principles of what transpired. Jimmy Savile was very beloved. Johnny Depp, again, not very familiar with anything. I know Pirates of the Caribbean, movies and so on. And beyond that, I really didn't have any awareness of either Johnny Depp or Amber Heard. But at any rate, the case was a case of someone who was very beloved in the eye of society, Johnny Depp. And how dare Amber Heard take him to task and bring a case against him, and even a second time. So
Question, if I
go
may.
ahead.
So
Definitely.
what do these abusers gain from what they are doing? Like, yes, they are controlling and dominating while they're abusing. And what drives them to keep doing this?
Which is a very good question, Annabelle. Probably not one that we'll necessarily be able to answer fully, because nobody can get inside the brain of a serial killer or a child sexual abuser or whatever, because honestly, we don't think the way that they would. But at the
because
same time, go ahead.
this imperfect victim is not threatening to them at all. So they're seeking out the imperfect victim, and how do they feel afterwards? Like they've gained something. Like I find it hard to understand why they would
Yes.
do this.
Well,
I think it's because,
Okay. If there's no answer, we'll just leave.
can I say something?
No, go ahead, Katya.
I-
Yes, please.
I think it's because, and I bet it's because patriarchy allows it. This is a culture, this is education, this is how men have been educated. I'm not saying into like childhood but the world have seen them that their behavior is acceptable. Because if you take the example of Jamie Savile, it was done publicly. There's video of him being harassing people in front of people. I mean, women, sorry, in front of women. And the only thing that he receives is applause, because they let that pass and they just look at him as a person that is able, to fundraise. But where people could see, they have not talked, because they thought that, yes, he's a man. So if he's reacting this way, it's because women are acting improperly. So the education, patriarchy had allowed men to behave without being reprimanded. And this has perpetuated along the years, where now you can see, you can look at Johnny Depp and see that the same thing is happening. Like, they have a victim in front of them, and they would rather condemn the victim instead of condemning that figure, because that figure, is known, for his movies, is known, is known for what he has done in the world, like if he was fundraising as well, money. This is what people, keep on and want to believe a person is. And so that is perpetuating, unfortunately. So what drives them is because they're not condemned. And so if you're not condemned, you can't examine yourself. You can't say, okay, this is right, or this is wrong what I'm doing, because nobody condemns you. And so it's a vicious cycle. Mom, that please. That makes them continue and continue on the path that they started.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning of an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's a very important aspect of the answer, Katya. Annabelle, go ahead. Were you wanting to add?
No, that's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I mean, yes, it doesn't
Because
solve everything, like what's driving their desire to be on that path, really. But yes, it is the basis, because they haven't been ever reprimanded, or yes. Yeah.
well, and honestly, there ends up being, with patriarchy, there ends up being an entitlement, right? That comes along, and an immunity comes often with fame, or with, as Katya was saying, not, in the first couple of instances, not being called onto the carpet and reprimanded and punished, whatever, caught, and it emboldens an individual, correct?
Mhm.
When they push the envelope, they take the boundary further and further, and it can be on that path that Katya was describing, where it just becomes that cycle. I think sometimes psychologically, not that we can get inside a brain of someone capable of doing some of these
Mhm.
horrific abusive things, but sometimes there can be a psychology at work that, just the thrill of getting away with something. The case of the 4 young college people down in Utah, Idaho, but murdered in their home, and the young man who ended up being charged with the murders, actually taking studying. He himself was involved in a law path at university, and forensics, I think, was a part of it, and some were positing that potentially he was doing it just to see, because he was that kind of a analytical kind of brain. I mean, I'm sure there were some psychological assessments that would bring out a lot more, but he was the kind of individual that wanted to see perhaps just what he could get away with. He'd studied various cases in the textbooks through some of his law courses that he was doing at university and so on, and was very fascinated by it all. And so, I mean, that's maybe one aspect.
Mhm.
Someone wanting to see if they can get away with something, and Jimmy Savile just, but I mean, other names are out there. We could go through all the, Bill O'Reilly and all the Rolf Harris. I mean, that takes it back a little bit in time, but I can remember, the uh, beloved reception, Rolf Harris, and again, often involving children and so on. I mean, in his abuse, it was only women, but at the same time, Jian Ghomeshi, CBC's Jian Ghomeshi, and actually, I ended up having a friend that had interacted with the lawyer, the female lawyer that Jian Ghomeshi had. And she said, "Oh, my friend said, that's a good lawyer. That's a good lawyer, that you can get somebody off." I mean, he ended up eventually having to face some consequences, but that you can get somebody off when they're guilty. And I've personally myself, I've often wondered how ethically a lawyer, because at one point years back, I had looked into going into law myself, but how, and that this was actually part of the reason that turned me against it, as well as the fact that it was a 7-year university program as opposed to the 5 years that I ended up doing. Anyway, that a lawyer could fight on behalf of somebody that they knew hadn't been decided in court yet. They knew was guilty, an O.J. Simpson or that or the other person, and I knew I would never be able to do that. Even years back as a young person, as I was looking at my university path, I knew, I wouldn't be able to do that as a lawyer. So anyway, we're going to move on. I'm gonna run out of time of hopefully what we can yet get through. So I do have another thought question. How will culture destroy democracy? How will culture destroy democracy? Because what Kachi said is very right. Patriarchy and culture, society, in Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's case, it was society that drove the reaction. It was social media, very definitely, but it's where the danger lies is in society. And so we'll come to, I'm going to just share screen again quickly to ponder that isn't that interesting? That's popped out now. So if we end up, you see if this just clicks it forward. No. Okay. If we end up taking an eye, Elder Tess's famous parable, taking an eye and the glasses that many of us need. You know, glasses made up of two lenses generally. But at any rate, if we were to label one politics and the other one religion, obviously the religion has maybe a little more relevance to us in some respects, but also now for us in politics. But at any rate, glasses with lenses, and it's the lenses that filter, right? Our view of topics, issues, what those topics and issues are, we filter them through the lenses of politics, religion. It's a tint, a reflection. Whereas the eye, it becomes culture, society, what shapes our mindset. And someone could be Muslim, someone could be Christian, someone could be Buddhist, someone could be atheist. The glasses change. With different glasses, you're going to get a different tint. It's going to manifest in a slightly different way. And someone who is atheist and sexist might appear a little differently to someone who is Southern Baptist, not atheist and sexist. It changes the tint. And it could be said that a young atheist woman, Elder Tess brings in the example of a young atheist woman that found that the new atheist glasses tint was worse than what you would find in religion. She's making that comment. They go to far further extremes, even than what happens in the hated religious people group. And that's an awful tint, you know, the new atheist tint on the glasses, but it's still just a reflection. Where does the sexism or the racism or the misogyny, where does it exist? It's in the eye, right? And she draws on, actually I'll leave the slide there. She draws on an article from Politico, how the culture war could break democracy. And written a few years back, but still, because a gentleman had written a book, a few books, but at any rate, she only uses parts of the article because the man actually does have wrong views. And as I read the whole article through, even originally, I could see, you know, some discrepancies and things that I didn't agree with, but Elder Tess makes some observation. The author says that our politics are reflections of deeper cultural dispositions. So what is deep is in the eye, and everything else, in other words, the lens or the lenses of the glasses, is just a tint, a reflection of it. On political matters, on the glasses, you can compromise, but the eye is where we find our ultimate moral worth. On ultimate moral worth, one cannot compromise. And to me, that's one of the beauties of the Midnight Cry messaging. And I know I wrestled a lot with that in 2019, you know, this moral prophetic questioning, you know, moral and prophetic. At one point, sort of no moral, you know, but I came to understand as time went by that the prophetic, the message, the present truth messages are what create the moral changes, and you have to have both. But moral truth, we don't compromise on, but conservatives see, pardon me, sorry, but the I is where we find that moral truth, and we don't compromise, but at the same time, it's going to be affected, our mindset is going to be affected by culture, by society. And she quotes two things from the article that I'll reference. Conservatives see it as an existential threat, and that's an important phrase. This man who's being interviewed by the political journalist is stating they see it as an existential threat to their way of life, to the things that they hold sacred. And we can see how in the movement, if we cling to the things that we have held sacred and feel threatened by someone coming along and seemingly changing those things, compromising, having a view lining up to the left, not the right anymore, then that person in the movement will justify themselves in not accepting that portion, cutting it off, twisting the remaining message to suit themselves, and then adding their own bits to it, basically creating a God in it. And some of the dialoguing in more recent time, just this, how we are interpreting, in some cases, communications, things that other people are saying, whether it be in WhatsApp or on social media or in whatever news item we follow, and each of us having to come to an opinion, if you like, or a position on such things. But and then the last thing from the political article that this author of his book on how culture wars will destroy democracy. Culture wars always precede shooting wars. They don't necessarily lead to a shooting war, but you never have a shooting war without a culture war prior to it, because culture provides the justification for violence. And I think that's where we are. And coming back to your question, Annabelle, in terms of Jimmy Savile, culture provides the justifications for violence. Inside a person's mind, they are going to justify themselves to be violent towards, to be abusive towards somebody. And the foundation for that has been culture, society, the culture in which they are moving in which they are moving. Go ahead.
Debbie, yes, we had a
Yes.
good example of that last week in Canada. I mean, last week or the week before, with the protests in Ottawa, against LGBTQ. And it was interesting to see that people who went to protest in front of schools were of different cultures. So there were Muslims there, and they were in the front, and you could see the children, stomping on the flags, the LGBTQ flag. But there was not also there was conservatives. There were different people from different background, and they all came, with that same mindset and that same justification to come and protest, because they don't want, the LGBTQ community to have rights here, and what was interesting to view is where they started they wanted to start, their protest, because there are places, Tawa, where you can protest that are there, especially for that. But they decided to start, with schools, because they also understand that education, is important, and it's part of the culture war, and it started there. And yeah, that was interesting to see that it's very close. It's happening. It's happening, and you don't have to have a specific religion to fight against it, because they would all gather, and they will all gather together, with the common goal. Yeah.
And Katja, you're right. I mean, excellent example, and seeing that unification, in the beginning with the fireflies, when I mentioned that the pulsing can synchronize and so on, and this happens with perpetual motion, or some of the different things scientifically. We've probably all seen things on YouTube in terms of things getting into sync. They all start out different frequencies, if it's sound, different, motion, rhythm, and so on. But at the same time, over a period of time, everything gets in sync. And these differing groups that we're aware of in society, maybe separated on the lines of religion, or separated on the lines of race, or whatever. And they're all coming together, not based on those distinctions, those lenses, if you like, of the glasses, but it's beyond that. It's beyond religion. It's beyond this, that. They're uniting on, as you put it, a common goal, a common belief, a common understanding, and it transcends the differences that they may have on other grounds with different groups. How men's rights activists are able to unite with libertarians and atheists, how those groups can, and this is the principle. I mean, enemies not even becoming friends, but enemies uniting for a common goal. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, enemy, different belief, one believing in resurrection, one not, no resurrection, but they're able to unite to crucify Christ. And you're right, we are seeing it play out in our society, and we don't have to go too far afield. It's in Alberta, it's in Canada, it's not just North America, and it's happening in different ways across the world. I'm going to stop share screen. I want to get to one thing that I'm going to do, something that's not necessarily always wise, I know, but I want us to contemplate an article, and I am going to read the whole article. It's not super long, but this is written by a woman anonymously. And well, I want us to consider, to contemplate why she's writing, what's her purpose, who she's writing to, or who her audience is that she is wanting, what she's saying, obviously, but the reaction as well, the result. And it was it just published 2 days ago, actually. So I want to see what the takeaways are from her article. And I didn't put it on a screen because I thought, oh, I'm just going to read it because I want you more just listening. Title: Women who have been sexually assaulted in workplaces or bedrooms or parks hear the ways we talk about it. When you have been sexually assaulted, you question yourself constantly. I don't know what it's like to be, and you could fill in any name, famous woman, unfamous woman, making a case against somebody for sexual assault, or even for that matter, abuse of whatever form. She provides a name, but I won't give it. She's writing from England. But unlike most people commenting on her in the wake of making rape allegations, this other woman has made rape allegations that are vehemently denied by perpetrator. I do not know what it's like to be raped by a political staffer while working for a politician, because it happened. Pardon me. I do know what it's like to be raped by a political staffer while working for a politician, because it happened to me. I was one of hundreds of people who made submissions to the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, Set the Standard report. After the report was released, I hoped that people in positions of power would listen, would care, would act, and would hold abusers accountable. I hoped that even if justice was out of reach for me, it would be within reach for younger women who reported similar experiences to mine. I wanted to make note of something. I hope that even if justice was up, Set the Standard was a 456-page memo to everyone in Australian parliamentary workplaces. Politicians, she's Australian, right? The Australian Guardian. Politicians, their staff, parliamentary department staff, and journalists. The message: do better. Some people in Parliament didn't need the report to get the memo. They already understood the issues because they had lived them. Others read the report and were able to empathize and understand. But cultural change takes time and happens one person at a time. There are people in and around Parliament who you could hit over the head repeatedly with that report and who would still not get the memo. There are also some people in parliamentary workplaces about whom serious allegations of inappropriate behavior have been made, which remain unresolved. The continued presence of those people undermines attempts to improve the culture. In 2021, I had not wanted to think about the traumatic experiences I'd had. But after so-and-so's allegations became a major news story, I didn't have much choice. The issue was in my face every day, on news websites, on TV, and on social media. We could think Amber Heard, kind of situation. And as I say, I want to qualify, it doesn't have to be a famous individual, just that often it comes more into the public eye with ones who have fame. In conversations with family, friends, and colleagues, strangers I met at parties found out I worked at Parliament House and wanted to talk about it. So I saw this other lady's story unfold and I listened to all the commentary around it. I watched and I learned and I considered my own options. What have I learned? I learned that if I report my experiences to the police, they might not be sympathetic to my version of events. I learned that private communications about my experiences might be leaked. I learned that if I disclose my experiences to politicians, some might be supportive. Others might choose to use my situation as a political football. I worry that politicians who don't want to become caught up in a game of political football might be reluctant to help me. I learned that if I go public in the media, my story will become public property. Journalists and the amateur commentators on social media will all have opinions about what happened and will share them freely. however uninformed you are. I learned that if I make a legal claim against my workplace, some people in the media and on social media will say that I am a liar who is only in it for the money. Across our society, when women report sexual assault, we ask the wrong question. Why was she there? What was she wearing? Why was she drinking? Was she flirting with him? Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she fight? Why didn't she immediately go to the police? We don't give enough attention to the right question. Why was he there? Why was he plying her with alcohol? Why was he trying to get her alone? Why did he touch her like that? Why did he have sex with her without her consent? When you have been sexually assaulted, you question yourself constantly because you have been raised in a society where the actions of the victims are scrutinized far more closely than those of perpetrators. Victims internalize that. You don't need to be in court being cross-examined to experience it because you have your own inner cross-examining barrister, lawyer, right there in your own head. Getting that self-questioning voice to shut up takes a lot of therapy and hard work. For me, it remains a work in progress. But even disbelieving or victim blaming comment, pardon me, but every disbelieving or victim blaming comment emboldens that internal voice and feels like a gut punch, basically a guilt. No, I'm to blame. All of us, but particularly journalists and politicians, need to realize that when we make comments about whoever the woman is, the one bringing the case forward, speaking out, we aren't just talking about that woman. Women like me who have been sexually assaulted in parliamentary workplaces hear those comments. Women who have been sexually assaulted in other workplaces or in bedrooms, parks, alleyways do too. And what we also hear is this: people won't believe you. People won't care what happened to you. If you're seeking justice, you won't find it. The men who rape women are listening to. And her final question: what message are they taking away? So, any thoughts or comments? I'll make two. In some of the dialogue happening in more recent time amongst us, Elder Parminder made a very important point, and he referenced, I'll say, two groups: those who were making comments, and then how he put it was the silent majority. And it takes a lot of courage to speak out in many different contexts. And for a woman who has been sexually assaulted, sexually abused, to speak out and tell somebody, and especially if it goes to the place of being a court case or becomes famous because of the fame of the person or people involved, it still takes the courage to speak out and then to be dismissed, disbelieved, minimized, brushed aside, told to be quiet, whatever the reactions. It it goes deeply. And so there is a principle, and it's a biblical principle that, we are to speak out. And if we hold silence, if we're witness to something wrong or whatever the case is, that we're held accountable, almost as if we had been doing it ourselves and so on, if we remain silent. And so the courage in whoever it is speaking out is something that in many cases gets ignored. And the second thing that I want to say in this young lady's well-crafted opinion piece in The Guardian, one of the things that I would add into everything that she was saying in terms of why or how people can get away with things in a sense. Sometimes it is also a case that the perpetrator is, or pardon me, others, not the initial perpetrator, but others who are not wanting to support the victim or whatever, that those others may possibly also be guilty of, if not the same crime and abuse, possibly different crime, whatever. And I have a personal experience myself, actually two of them, but one of them I'll relay, whereby a young person had let me know in terms of sexual abuse occurring in her home. And I was absolutely shocked, but absolutely devastated, and became an advocate for her. And following through that process, it became very disheartening to both of us how it ended up actually playing out. And it was, government individuals, et cetera, agencies, and so on, all became involved. Everything had been gone through the proper protocols, and everything that, is set up to handle such situations. But how it ended up, the young person basically, wasn't exactly in these words, but basically was told, go home, be a good girl, and life will go on. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked, and in essence ended up actually I ended up quitting at that point. As I say, there were a couple of things that had happened that led to that decision, but I quit. I was disillusioned. My rose-colored glasses had come off, and yeah, it was something that was a travesty, and yet how many times does something similar get played out in whatever the context is? And so we have a role to play, those of us in the movement, and I just hope and pray that each of us in our various spheres of influence and so on will fulfill the role that God has for us. Anyway, I wanted to not talk too much. I wanted to give anybody, if they had any thoughts or comments, just on either on that letter or anything else that came to mind, or that article.
It It just seems like society doesn't really want justice because it interferes with power and money and their personal goals, their own selfishness. And this, about the victim, there is somebody who is very close to me that has had an abusive marriage, and now as things are better for her and she looks back on it, she still is in that mindset of I was scrutinizing herself. I was so wrong, and the self-blame. And it was just as much my problem as his. And this article was very good to just try to see it from the victim's perspective. And it reminded me of something else that now it's just gone from my mind of anyway, it'll come back later. But yes, I did appreciate that article a lot.
Annabelle, what you're saying is so true in terms of a lot of situations that individuals end up facing, that self-blame and so on. As you were talking as well, the analogy of what's going on with the King of the South and the King of the North came to mind. And there was some genuine fear on the part of the American, I won't say the full government, but I'll use the word government, in part, that has flavored their response ongoing. And the fear of what would happen if the power structure current in Russia right now, Putin, dictator, was no longer there.
Yes.
What would it really mean? What would it really do? And we have to walk very cautiously and carefully. And I'm not discounting that is a reality for sure in world events. Very definitely, there has to be a carefulness just as much as in individual lives. There has to be a carefulness and a wisdom, but at the same time, where we allow others to get away with what they're doing and take some of the blame to ourselves, or we are afraid of what would happen. Society is afraid that, the power structures and sometimes the money that's connected, and, Harvey Weinstein, for him to be brought to justice, that was in some cases a big thing because of all the tentacles that were implicated, the power, the money, everything. And many times, we're admonished in scripture to count the cost, right? Before embarking on something, you weigh out, count the cost. Jesus himself admonishes that. And so for a lot of people as victims, they're counting the cost. And as this woman brings out, they watched the E. Jean Carols, they watched the this, that, and the other case, and the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp cases, you know, and they're having to weigh out. Do I come forward? Is the statute of limitations going to, you know, the American, going to be against me? Time run out, you know, on and on and on, all the different aspects before making a decision.
And our eyes have to be opened as to how sensitive they are, just like an LGBTQ victim who is on a forum and hears all the comments of those outside their
Community.
community, and how sensitive they are to the comments that are being made. We learned that last week, or we should have learned it, but yes, it takes time for us. We're so slow. I'm so slow.
And both Elder Perminder and Elder Tess are very able to direct us aright in terms of being very careful about triggering, and that there are sensitivities out there. Not all of us, in fact, none of us do have all the same experiences of life and the same situation and so on. So it is well, as Elder Tess, I referred to it earlier, but Elder Tess has said, we're required to understand this. We're required to understand sexism. We're required to educate ourselves.
Mhm.
Anyway, we're at a transition now. We're out of time, a little bit over time, actually. And so we're going to end there. Next time I will, because I will continue a part 2 of this. And as I say, I want to get to this book, sort of the what started this whole, you know, me navigating through the study, well, and then some, but anyway, next time what I was starting to do is just tip this up a bit again. We'll come back to, as I say, the overarching theme is feminism, but next time around we'll unpack. I was going to get to it today, but we'll unpack more the timeline, bring out some of the things, take it a little beyond perhaps for the purposes of our discussion, what Elder Tess in well, in one of her videos particularly takes it, and then finish off with, you know, further discussion of patriarchy and just some of the situations and highlights of the book Angela Saini has written on the patriarchs, and end it off there. Anyway, want to thank you for participating, and we're going to close with prayer, and then we'll finish the recording. Dear God of heaven, we thank you that you let us know you have requirements. Your requirements have not really changed over time, but the test has. And the principles of your kingdom have not changed over time, but we're at the end of time. And what you're teaching us now, specific to this dispensation, and as things will further culminate beyond the Sunday law, we know that you are requiring us to learn things, specific things. And we just ask that you will continue to assist us, to allow our hearts to grasp what you're teaching us, that we may deepen our empathy for one another and for others, that we will give the symbol a certain sound, that we will have the message aright, that we will live the message rightfully, and that we will represent you and your kingdom in this world as it draws to a close. Bless each of us, bless your people throughout the world. And as we learn from one another, may we continue to extend grace to each other, but also be willing to speak up and to call sin by its right name, that we all may learn from it. Bless us now in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. Well, thank you.